He had built his empire from nothing, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment when a young boy appeared at his doorstep, claiming to be his son. The boy's resemblance to him was undeniable, but how could that be possible? The secrets of the past were about to unravel, and with them, a life James never knew existed. James Williams had spent his entire life building his empire, focusing on his career and his company. For him, success was everything. It was his driving force, his passion, and the reason he worked day and night without taking a single break. He had built his wealth from the ground up, leaving behind relationships and a personal life that he had never really had time for. Family was a concept that always seemed distant, something for other people who had time for it. His world revolved around business, acquisitions, and strategic planning, and he was content with it. He had everything he needed: money, power, influence. But all of that changed in an instant. One chilly evening, as James drove home from another long day at the office, he took his usual route down a quiet street near his home. It was late, and the road was nearly empty, but something caught his eye: a flicker of orange in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a streetlight malfunctioning, but as he got closer, he realized it was fire. The glow of the flames illuminated the night sky, and panic surged through him. Without thinking, he slammed his foot on the brake and swerved to the side of the road. His heart raced as he grabbed his phone and dialed 911, but something made him hesitate. He was too close now. He could already see the house, engulfed in flames, its windows darkened with smoke. The fear in the air was palpable, and he could hear something that sent a chill down his spine: the faint, desperate cries of a child. Without another thought, he ran toward the house. The flames were thick, and the smoke was overwhelming, but James didn't care. He wasn't thinking about his safety, about the dangers of a fire. He heard the cries again, louder now, and knew he couldn't wait for the firemen. He had to act, and he had to act fast. As he entered the house, the heat hit him like a wall, but his focus was singular: finding the child. The smoke burned his eyes, but he pushed through it, searching frantically for the source of the cries. The house seemed endless, and every corner he turned revealed more devastation. But finally, in the farthest room, he saw the child. A small boy, no older than 4 or 5, was huddled in the corner, his eyes wide with fear. James didn't hesitate. He scooped the boy up into his arms, ignoring the searing heat, and ran back toward the front door. The smoke made it harder to breathe, but he pushed on, the sound of the child's cries still ringing in his ears. He was almost to safety when he spotted the firefighters arriving, and he handed the child over to one of them, gasping for air, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline. But it wasn't over yet. As James turned to walk away, he saw a figure running toward the house, a woman. Her face was filled with panic, and her eyes locked onto him with a look of desperation. She ran up to him and stopped short when she saw the boy in the firefighter's arms. She froze, staring, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, the woman took a shaky step forward, her eyes wide as she whispered, "That's my son." James looked at her, confused, the fire and the chaos still swirling around them. But when she looked at him, something clicked. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck him. He recognized her. She was Lisa, his ex-girlfriend. The one person he had loved and lost so many years ago. He hadn't seen her in years, not since they had broken up, and yet, standing there in front of him, she was as familiar as ever. He opened his mouth to say something, but his mind was racing. How could this be? He had never known they had a child together. They had been so careful to part ways amicably, so focused on their separate lives, that neither of them had ever spoken about the future, about what might have come next. Lisa, too, seemed stunned. She was looking at the boy in the firefighter's arms, her face pale, her mouth trembling as she whispered, "You don't know, do you? He's your son." James couldn't speak. His world was spinning. He had never known. How could he not know? The questions flooded his mind, but before he could say anything, Lisa stepped closer, her eyes locked on the boy. "I never told you," she said, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the fire trucks and sirens. I thought you didn't want to know. But he's yours, James. He's your son." The words hit him like a blow. His son. He had a son, and he had never known. The reality of it seemed impossible, and yet, standing there in the smoke-filled air, it felt more real than anything else he had ever experienced. He wasn't sure what to say, how to react. His mind was a blur, trying to process everything at once. The fire continued to rage behind them, but James couldn't move. He stood frozen, staring at Lisa, trying to understand. How could this be real? How had he missed this? And more than that, what did he do now? How did he make it right? In the chaos of the moment, all he could do was stand there, holding the weight of a truth he had never imagined. James sat in his car, the engine still running, his mind reeling from the confrontation outside the house. The fire had long since been contained, but the weight of what Lisa had said, what he had just discovered, kept him paralyzed in his seat. His son. He had a son. The realization sat heavy in his chest, making it difficult to breathe. He glanced toward the house again, still partially smoking, the fire trucks now beginning to pack up, and all he could think of was the boy. The boy who, for the last 4 years, had lived his life without him. How could he not have known? He had been so sure of his life, his choices, so certain that his career and his empire were all that mattered. But now, all of that seemed insignificant. He had missed it. Missed a part of his life that he never even knew existed. A child. His child. And now, he didn't know what to do. His mind raced, thinking back to his last conversations with Lisa, wondering how she could have kept this from him. Why hadn't she told him? Was she trying to protect him from the responsibility, or had she just given up on him altogether? The sound of the car door opening snapped him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Lisa approaching him, her face still pale from the shock of the fire and their encounter. She was walking slowly, as if she wasn't entirely sure how to approach him. He felt a surge of frustration, mixed with confusion. He wanted answers. He needed to understand why all of this had been kept from him. When she reached the car, she stood there for a moment, looking at him with those same brown eyes that had once made him feel so comfortable and secure. But now, those eyes only made him feel uncertain, like they held secrets he had never been privy to. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "James," she said quietly. "I know this is a lot to take in. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. But you have to understand, I didn't know how to tell you." He looked at her, trying to keep his emotions in check, but it was difficult. "How could you not tell me?" he asked, his voice harsh before he could stop it. "How could you keep something like this from me? I've been living my life, completely oblivious to the fact that I have a son. And you," he stopped, unable to continue. The words felt stuck in his throat. "Why didn't you say anything?" Lisa looked away, taking a deep breath before meeting his gaze again. She seemed to gather herself, as if trying to find the right words. "I didn't know how," she said, her voice quieter now, almost apologetic. "After we broke up, I was scared. I thought you wouldn't want anything to do with him. That you wouldn't care. You were so focused on your career, and I didn't want to burden you with it. I never wanted to put that kind of pressure on you." James ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of her words. He had been so focused on his work, so consumed by the ambition that had driven him to the top, that he had never once stopped to consider the consequences of that focus. He had built an empire, but in the process, he had neglected everything else. And now, here he was, facing a child he didn't know and a woman who had kept him in the dark. "But you should have told me," he said, his voice softening, though the frustration was still there. "I had a right to know. I had a right to be part of his life, to be there for him." Lisa nodded, her eyes filled with guilt. "I know," she said quietly. I know. And I'm sorry. I should have said something, but I was scared, James. I didn't want to ruin your life, I didn't want to force you into something you didn't want. There was a long silence between them. James sat in the car, staring out the windshield, his mind whirling with thoughts he couldn't quite process. He had always told himself that his success was the result of hard work and sacrifice, but now he was starting to question everything. What was all of it worth if he had missed out on something as important as this? His son. Max. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't comprehend how he had lived his life without knowing about him, how he had never even considered the possibility that there was someone out there who carried his blood, his genes, his name. I don't know what to do now, James said, his voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the situation settling on him like a heavy blanket. I don't know how to be a father. I've never even thought about it. Lisa took a step closer to him, her expression softening with understanding. You don't have to know everything right now. None of us do. We take it one step at a time. James turned to look at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. But it's not just about me, is it? It's about Max. He deserves a father. He deserves a chance. Lisa nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He deserves more than I could give him on my own. But I never thought you'd come back into the picture. I never thought you'd want this. I don't know if I want it either, James admitted, the words feeling strange coming from his mouth. But I know I can't just walk away. I have to try. I don't know how, but I'm willing to figure it out. Lisa's face softened, a small, sad smile tugging at the corner of her lips. That's all I'm asking for, James. Just try. James exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. There was no going back. His life, their lives, had just changed. Whether he was ready for it or not, he now had a responsibility. He had a son, and for better or worse, that was something he couldn't ignore. With a final glance at Lisa, James opened the car door and stepped out, ready to face whatever came next. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he couldn't run away anymore. This was his chance. His chance to be something he had never thought possible, a father. James spent the next few days in a haze, unable to shake the overwhelming revelation that had changed everything. The fire, the boy, the moment Lisa had told him that Max was his son, all of it seemed like a dream, something he couldn't quite grasp. His usual routine of meetings, emails, and conference calls felt meaningless now. He couldn't stop thinking about Max, about the little boy he had just learned existed and how he had missed out on so much of his life. James found himself restless, staring at his phone but unable to make any calls, unsure of how to begin this new chapter. How did one simply step into the role of a father after so many years of absence? He kept replaying the scene from the fire in his mind. The way Max had looked at him, those wide eyes filled with fear, and the way his small body had felt in his arms. James had never imagined himself as a father, let alone a father to a child he didn't even know existed. But now, as he sat in his office staring blankly at his desk, he realized that there was no turning back. This was real. Max was his son, and he had to figure out how to be the father the boy needed. He decided to go to Lisa's house again. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to see Max again. The boy had become a part of his life in a way that James couldn't quite explain, and he knew that avoiding it wouldn't make it go away. He couldn't continue hiding behind his career, his work. He had to show up, be present. That was the first step, he thought. Showing up. When he arrived, Lisa was already waiting for him at the door. Her expression was one of cautious optimism, but there was also a hint of uncertainty. She had clearly been through a lot herself, trying to raise Max alone, and James knew that he couldn't expect her to suddenly welcome him back into their lives without hesitation. He had to prove that he was ready, that he was serious. "Hi," Lisa said softly, her voice tentative. "I didn't think you'd come by today." James gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I had to. I can't keep running from this, Lisa. I can't pretend it doesn't matter. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. I'm glad you came. Max. He's been asking about you. He's still trying to process everything, but he's been asking a lot of questions. James followed her into the house, his mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. He was scared. He didn't know how to be a father, how to connect with a child he had never known. He had no guidebook for this, no roadmap. He had spent years building a career, learning to be an expert in business, but this was something entirely new. When they reached the living room, Max was sitting on the floor, his back to them, playing with a toy. He didn't notice James enter at first. James stood there for a moment, just watching the boy. The resemblance was undeniable. Max's curly hair, the same dark brown eyes. He looked so much like James, it almost felt surreal. The moment felt heavy, and James wasn't sure what to do next. He had never been in a situation like this before. He wanted to approach the boy, but he didn't want to overwhelm him. Finally, Max turned around and saw James standing there. The boy froze for a moment, his eyes widening as he looked at the stranger in front of him. There was a brief moment of hesitation, and then he spoke in a small voice, almost as if he was unsure of what to say. "Are you, my dad?" he asked. James's heart skipped a beat at the question. It was the first time anyone had ever called him that, and hearing it from his son was overwhelming. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. "I think so," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know about you until recently, but I'm here now, Max. I want to get to know you." Max didn't say anything right away. He just stared at James, his small face unreadable. James could see the confusion in the boy's eyes, the wariness, and it made him feel like an intruder in his own son's life. Max had every right to be confused, to be unsure. James hadn't been there for him, and now he was asking to be a part of his world. Lisa, who had been standing quietly by the doorway, stepped forward. "Max, it's okay," she said softly. "James is your dad. You can trust him." Max looked at her, then back at James. After a moment, he nodded slowly, though he still seemed unsure. "Okay," he said quietly. James felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The boy hadn't rejected him. There was hope, however small, that they could begin to build a relationship. For the next few hours, James sat with Max and Lisa, trying to ease into the new reality. He didn't know how to be a father, but he knew he had to try. They played some games, talked about school, and slowly, as the evening wore on, James started to feel a sense of connection with the boy. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was real. And it was a beginning. When James left that night, he felt a mixture of emotions. His heart ached for all the lost time, for all the moments he would never get back. But there was also a sense of determination building inside him. He wasn't going to let fear or uncertainty stop him from being there for Max. This was his son. And no matter how hard it was, he was going to be the father Max deserved. As he drove home, James couldn't stop thinking about the boy and what the future might hold. There was so much to figure out, so many hurdles to overcome. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose beyond work. He had a son now. And he was going to make sure he didn't miss out on any more of his life. The following week felt like a blur for James. His mind was constantly racing, trying to process everything that had happened, trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality. Being a father wasn't something he had ever planned for. It wasn't something he had ever thought about, and now, suddenly, he was supposed to be part of a child's life. Max, his son, was still trying to adjust to this strange man who appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be his father. Every time James thought he was starting to understand how to connect with the boy, something would happen to make him feel like he was failing again. James spent more time at Lisa's house, but every visit left him with a sense of frustration. Max would engage with him for a few minutes, asking questions about his life, but then would retreat back into his shell, as though he wasn't sure how to act. It was understandable. Max had been raised by Lisa alone, and now, suddenly, there was a man in his life, a man who was supposed to be his father, but wasn't really a part of his world yet. Lisa, too, was hesitant. She had learned to handle everything on her own, raising Max without the help of the man who had fathered him. Her reluctance to fully trust James was evident, even though she had admitted that she wanted him to be a part of their lives. But how could she, after all these years, suddenly allow someone back into their world, someone who had missed so much? One evening, after another tense but quiet visit, James sat alone in his car in the driveway, staring at the front door. He could see the flicker of light coming through the windows. He had tried to talk to Max, but it always felt forced. He could tell the boy didn't know how to react, how to deal with this sudden intrusion into his life. And it made James feel like an outsider in his own family. After a long pause, James finally got out of the car. His steps were slow as he approached the front door, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He knocked lightly, waiting for someone to answer, but he already knew it would be Lisa. She always answered first. The door opened, and she stood there, her face soft but guarded. "James," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of hesitation. "Max is in his room. He's been asking about you. He's still unsure, but I think he's starting to get it." James nodded, trying to suppress the wave of emotions that flooded through him. He didn't know how to be a father, but he was here, he was trying. He just hoped it was enough. Inside, Max was sitting at his small desk, scribbling something in a notebook. He didn't look up as James entered, and there was a long silence between them. James sat down at the edge of the bed, unsure of what to say. How could he fix everything in one conversation? How could he undo the years of absence and neglect? "Hey, Max," James said, his voice soft but steady. "How's it going?" Max looked up, meeting his gaze briefly before looking back down at the notebook. "It's fine," he muttered, not giving much away. James took a deep breath. He knew Max was trying, but the walls between them were so thick. "I brought something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small gift bag. "I thought you might like it." Max hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked over to James, his eyes scanning the bag. He took it from James's hands and opened it carefully. Inside was a small toy car, something that James had remembered him talking about a few weeks ago. "I remember you saying you liked cars," James said, his voice low, almost unsure. "So I thought you might like this." Max looked at the toy for a moment, then glanced up at James. His expression was still guarded, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Thanks," he said quietly, but there was a hesitancy in his voice. It wasn't much, but it was something. And to James, it felt like a small breakthrough. "I'm trying, Max," James said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I know it's not easy. I know I'm a stranger to you, but I want to be here for you. I want to get to know you. And I'm not going anywhere." Max didn't respond at first, but after a long pause, he nodded slightly. It wasn't much, but to James, it felt like progress. Slowly, over the next few days, things began to shift, ever so slightly. Max began to engage with him a little more, asking about his work, his life, as though he was trying to learn about the father he had never known. James didn't know how to answer some of the questions, but he tried his best, hoping that the effort would count for something. Lisa, too, started to soften. She didn't let her guard down entirely, but she began to trust James more, even if just a little. One evening, as they sat in the living room after dinner, she looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You're doing better than I thought you would," she said, her voice quieter than usual. James looked at her, unsure of how to respond. "I'm trying," he said simply. "I don't know how to do this, but I'm here. I want to be a part of his life. I want to do this right." Lisa nodded, her eyes softening. I see that. And Max, he's starting to see it, too. It's not going to happen overnight, James. But he's not rejecting you anymore. That's a good start. James let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that it could work, that they could move forward, even if it was slow. He didn't have all the answers, but he was starting to feel like, just maybe, he could make this work. For Max. For Lisa. For himself. James woke up the next morning with a sense of dread weighing on his chest. The past few weeks had been a blur of emotions and uncertainty, and while he had made progress with Max, it felt like there was always something lingering between them. Every step forward seemed followed by 2 steps back. He had never realized how complex relationships could be, especially with a child he had never known. As the days went by, he tried harder and harder to be a father to Max, but no matter how much effort he put in, he could never escape the nagging doubt that he was doing it wrong. After the events of the last few days, James knew he couldn't just continue with the half-hearted attempts. He had to find a way to truly connect with Max, to make him feel comfortable with the idea of having a father, even if he was a stranger to him. James felt like a failure every time Max pulled away from him or remained quiet, as if he wasn't sure how to navigate this new dynamic. He had no idea how to break down the walls Max had built, walls that were so understandably there after being without him for so long. The uncertainty was suffocating. But despite the doubt, James couldn't stop himself from wanting to try. This wasn't just about showing up anymore. It was about being present in a way he hadn't been before, about stepping into a role that was both terrifying and unfamiliar to him. It wasn't about perfection. It was about trying to make things right. As the sun began to set that evening, James drove over to Lisa's house again. He had spent the day thinking about the way Max looked at him, the way the boy's eyes softened just a little when James spoke, when he showed him any kind of affection or care. It was as if Max was testing him, seeing if James was real, if he would stick around. The uncertainty in his eyes was painful to witness. When he arrived, Lisa greeted him with a nod. Her face was still tired, but there was a warmth there, something he hadn't seen in her for a long time. The hesitation was still there, of course, but it wasn't as sharp. She had allowed him into their lives, but she still kept a protective distance, both from him and from her emotions. "Hey," James said as he entered the living room. Max was sitting on the couch, absorbed in a video game. It was the same routine, but tonight, it felt different. It felt like it could be a turning point. "Hey, Max," James said, trying to sound casual but knowing his voice betrayed the nerves he was feeling. Max looked up from the screen, but his expression was unreadable. It wasn't a smile, but it wasn't a frown either. "Hey," Max mumbled, then returned his gaze to the game. James watched him for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. Lisa, sensing the tension, stepped into the room and gave a soft smile. "Why don't you give him some space? He's been on that game for hours, and it's probably time to take a break." James nodded, though he couldn't hide the frustration in his expression. He knew Lisa was trying to make him feel better, but the silence between him and Max felt deafening. He wasn't used to this, he wasn't used to being ignored, to not knowing what to do next. He wanted to talk to Max, but every time he tried, it seemed like Max wasn't ready to hear him. "Max," James said, taking a deep breath, "how about we go outside for a while? I've been meaning to teach you how to ride a bike. I know you've been practicing, but I thought I could help." Max hesitated, his thumb frozen on the controller for a moment. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again. "I don't need help with that," he said flatly, still not looking at James. James wasn't sure whether to be upset or understand. The boy had spent the last few years without him, and he wasn't going to open up just because James said so. He knew that. He had to approach this with patience, no matter how frustrating it was. "I get that," James said softly. "But I'm here, Max. I'm not going anywhere. And I'd really like to spend some time with you. Just, the two of us. Max didn't respond right away. He just kept his eyes on the screen, but this time, it felt like there was something different in the air. It wasn't an outright rejection. It wasn't an invitation either, but it wasn't closed off. It was progress, slow as it might have been. James turned toward Lisa, his eyes silently asking for help. Lisa nodded, understanding what he was trying to do. She walked over to the couch, crouched down, and gently placed a hand on Max's shoulder. "Max," she said softly, "I think it would be good for both of you. He's trying, you know." Max shifted uncomfortably. "I guess," he muttered, his voice small. James gave a small, relieved smile, but he didn't push it. Instead, he took a seat at the table nearby, not wanting to crowd Max. For the next few moments, there was an awkward silence in the room, broken only by the sounds of the game Max was playing. James wasn't sure what to do next. Should he push harder? Should he let Max come to him? He didn't know. Suddenly, Max paused the game and turned to look at James. "Okay," he said quietly. "But I don't need your help." James smiled, a feeling of warmth filling his chest. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Fair enough," he said. "Let's just go outside and see what happens." They went to the backyard, where James helped Max onto his bike. He was careful to stay back, giving Max space to figure things out, but the fact that Max had agreed to come outside with him felt like a huge step forward. As Max began to ride, James kept a steady eye on him, ready to step in if needed, but not hovering over him. For the first time, James felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. This wasn't about teaching Max to ride a bike, it was about showing him that he was there, that he would keep showing up. He was trying. That was all he could do for now. James sat on the porch steps, his elbows resting on his knees as he watched Max in the yard. The boy was sitting on the grass, his hands clasped around his knees, staring out into the distance. The air had cooled slightly, the evening sun casting long shadows across the yard, and yet James could feel a warmth in the moment. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but there was something there. Something real. Max had been quiet since their bike lesson earlier that day. It had gone better than James had expected. The first few attempts had been clumsy, Max wobbling as he tried to balance, but after a while, he'd gotten the hang of it. He didn't smile, didn't cheer when he made it down the driveway without falling, but James noticed something, a slight shift. Max had been looking at him differently, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone he could trust, at least a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The distance between them had been narrowing ever so slightly, but there were still walls, thick and tall. It was as though Max was letting him in, just a crack at a time. James had tried his best to keep the conversation light, to avoid pushing too hard, but there was always that underlying tension, the feeling that Max didn't know how to trust him yet, didn't know if he could. And James understood. How could he expect the boy to just forget the years he had spent alone, without him? How could he expect Max to embrace him when he hadn't been there for him in the first place? Lisa came out to join him, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed one to James, her fingers brushing his briefly, and sat beside him. Neither of them said anything at first. They both just watched Max in silence, both lost in their thoughts. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves in the trees was the only noise between them. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice soft. "You're making progress, James. I can see it." James turned to her, his face tired. He hadn't expected her to speak up, but the words felt like a balm to his raw emotions. "I'm trying," he said, looking back at Max, "but it doesn't feel like enough. I'm still a stranger to him. He doesn't really see me as his father yet." Lisa sipped her tea before replying. "It takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. He's been without you for 4 years, James. It's not going to be easy for him to just accept you, even if he knows you're trying. She paused, her gaze softening. But you're here now, and you're not giving up. That means a lot to him. Even if he doesn't show it. James nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He didn't know what he had expected, maybe for Max to suddenly embrace him and accept him as the father he should have been. But reality was far more complicated. Max's wariness, his hesitation, it was all understandable. He had never asked for this, never wanted his life to be turned upside down. James hadn't been there for the boy, and now, after all this time, he was supposed to just step into the role of a father. It felt overwhelming at times, like he was too late. But what if I'm not enough? James asked quietly, more to himself than to Lisa. What if I can't do this? What if he never sees me as his dad, no matter how hard I try? Lisa put her cup down and looked at him seriously. That's a fear every parent has, James. But you can't look at it that way. You don't get to choose how quickly or how easily a child accepts you. What matters is that you're there, that you're trying. That's more than most people get. James didn't answer immediately. He stared at Max again, who was still sitting on the grass, looking lost in his own thoughts. He knew Lisa was right, of course. He couldn't control how quickly Max came to accept him. But the fear of failing him, of never being good enough, still lingered. It was hard to shake. I don't know if I can do this, James said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I've spent my whole life building something, working so hard, and now I'm faced with something I don't know how to fix. I don't know how to be the kind of father he needs. Lisa's voice was soft but firm. None of us know how to do it at first. You just have to keep trying. One step at a time. And I think you're doing more than you realize. James looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. He had always been a man of logic and certainty. His life had been predictable, controllable. He had been able to plan everything, but this, fatherhood, being a part of Max's life, this was different. It didn't come with a manual. There were no clear answers, no set path to follow. It was just him, trying to figure it out. Max got up from the grass and walked over to them. He stopped a few feet away, still not quite making eye contact, but his presence felt like a quiet invitation. He didn't say anything, but there was something in his posture, something in the way he stood there, that made James feel like he was finally starting to be seen. Hey, Max, James said, his voice steady but soft. Max shifted his weight and looked at James, his face still guarded but not as closed off as before. Can we go play catch? He asked, his voice small, but there was a hint of hope in it, something that made James's heart skip a beat. James's mouth went dry, but he nodded, the fear and doubt momentarily fading as he stood up. Sure, he said, his voice thicker than he intended. Let's go. They spent the next hour in the yard, throwing the ball back and forth. Max wasn't the best at it, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were together, doing something simple, something that felt normal. It wasn't the perfect father-son bonding moment James had envisioned, but it was real. It was a start. As the sun dipped below the horizon, and Max threw the ball to him one last time before heading inside, James realized that this was what it was about. Not perfect moments or grand gestures, but showing up, day after day, and simply being present. Max was still hesitant, still unsure of who James was, but for the first time, James felt like he was moving in the right direction. Later that night, as James sat in his car ready to leave, he looked at the house one last time. It was still a long road ahead, but he had made a choice. He wasn't going to walk away. He was going to keep trying, no matter how hard it was, no matter how uncertain it felt. He wasn't just building an empire anymore. He was building a family. And that was worth everything. James woke up early the next morning, his mind still filled with thoughts of Max. The previous day had been an unexpected breakthrough, and he found himself replaying every moment. The way Max had walked over to him, asking to play catch, was something James had never expected. It was so small, so simple, yet it felt like the first step toward truly connecting with his son. It wasn't the big moment he had imagined, but it didn't need to be. Max had invited him in, even if only for a moment, and that was enough to give James hope. But as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that continued to weigh on him. He didn't know how long it would take for Max to trust him completely, to see him as more than just the man who had suddenly appeared in his life. James knew that he couldn't rush it. He had to be patient, something he had never been particularly good at. He had spent his entire life planning, working toward a specific goal, but now, with Max, there was no clear path, no deadlines to meet. It was all about waiting, about showing up every day, proving that he was committed. That afternoon, he decided to take a different approach. He would give Max space, but he would also make it clear that he was there for him, no matter what. After a quiet morning at the office, James made his way to Lisa's house, knowing that he had to keep moving forward, even if it felt uncomfortable. It wasn't about making grand gestures anymore, it was about the small, everyday moments that added up over time. When he arrived, Lisa greeted him at the door with a small but welcoming smile. She seemed a little more at ease than before, as if the tension that had once existed between them had softened. There was still a level of caution, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been in the past. She led him into the living room, where Max was sitting on the couch, flipping through a comic book. "Hey, Max," James said, trying to sound casual but finding that his voice still held a hint of nervousness. He wasn't sure if Max would respond, but he had learned not to expect anything. He was going to have to let Max come to him at his own pace. Max didn't look up at first, and the silence between them stretched on for a few moments. James could feel the weight of the moment, could feel the pressure of trying to fix something that had been broken for so long. But he had to remind himself that it wasn't about fixing everything right now. It was about building a relationship, piece by piece. Finally, Max glanced up, his eyes meeting James's for the briefest moment before looking back at the comic book. "Hey," he muttered, not offering anything more. James could tell that Max was still hesitant, still unsure of how to interact with him. It was like walking on eggshells, not wanting to make any sudden moves, not wanting to scare him off. "Do you want to play something?" James asked, trying to sound relaxed. "Maybe we could go outside again. Or I could teach you how to throw a ball properly. I remember when I was your age, I loved playing catch." Max didn't say anything for a long time. James waited, feeling the silence stretch between them. He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing, if this was how to reach Max. But he knew that if he didn't try, if he didn't make an effort, then nothing would ever change. Finally, Max shrugged and put the comic book down. "Okay," he said, his voice small but not entirely resistant. He stood up and walked toward the door without looking back at James, but James followed him outside, feeling a small sense of relief. It wasn't a big step, but it was something. They spent the next hour in the yard, tossing a ball back and forth. Max wasn't exactly enthusiastic about it, but he didn't pull away either. He threw the ball with a lack of energy, but his aim was improving, and after a while, he started to look at James when he spoke, even offering a small, almost imperceptible smile when he managed to catch the ball without dropping it. It was slow progress, but it was progress. For the first time, James felt like he wasn't just a stranger trying to force himself into Max's life. He felt like he was starting to be a part of it, even if it was only a small part for now. As the sun began to set, and Max threw the ball one last time before heading back inside, James realized something important. This wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But he was willing to keep trying. He was willing to show up, day after day, no matter how hard it got. Max deserved that, and so did he. Later that night, after he had left Lisa's house and was sitting in his car, James thought about the day. He thought about how Max had interacted with him, how he had allowed him to be there, even if only for a brief moment. And for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could do this. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what the future held, but he was starting to believe that he was capable of being the father Max needed. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to keep trying. As he drove home, James felt a quiet sense of peace. It was still a long road ahead, and there would be moments when he doubted himself, when he wondered if he was doing enough. But in that moment, with the memory of Max's small smile fresh in his mind, James knew that he wasn't giving up. He wasn't walking away. He was going to keep showing up, no matter how hard it got. And maybe, just maybe, he would find a way to make it work. James woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose, something he hadn't felt in years. The moments he had spent with Max the previous day, no matter how small, felt like a breakthrough. He had spent so much of his life focused on building his empire, on reaching the top of his career, and had neglected the things that truly mattered. But now, with Max, things were different. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he had to give this everything he had. For the first time, he was determined to be more than just a successful businessman. He was determined to be a father. The morning was quiet, the sun barely peeking through the curtains of his room. He stood up, stretched, and glanced at his phone. There was a message from Lisa. It was short but meaningful. "Max is asking about you today. He seems to be warming up a little more. I think he wants to see you." The message sent a rush of hope through him. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Max wanted to see him again. That was a sign. It meant that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the stranger he had once been in his son's eyes. James quickly showered and dressed, his mind already focused on the day ahead. He had no plans except to spend time with Max, to keep making the effort, to keep showing up, no matter how slow the progress was. He grabbed his keys, walked out the door, and headed straight to Lisa's house. When he arrived, Lisa opened the door with a smile, though there was still a level of caution in her eyes. She had been reserved in the past, unsure of how to approach this whole situation, but today, there was something different about her. She didn't seem as guarded as she had been, and for the first time, James could see the softening of her expression. "Good morning," Lisa greeted him, stepping aside to let him in. "Morning," James replied, his voice steady but with a hint of excitement. "How's Max?" "He's good," she said, "he's been asking about you. I think he's ready for you to spend some more time with him today. You can come in and see for yourself." James followed her into the living room, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why he was nervous. It wasn't like he had to prove anything, but every time he saw Max, he felt the weight of the responsibility to be a father, to make up for all the years he had missed. Max was sitting on the couch, playing with a toy car. When he saw James enter, he looked up, a hesitant expression crossing his face. "Hey, Max," James said softly, taking a few steps forward. He didn't want to crowd the boy, but he wanted to let him know he was there. Max didn't immediately respond. He just stared at James for a few moments, then slowly put the car down beside him. He seemed unsure, as though he didn't quite know how to react. It was clear to James that Max was still processing everything, but there was something different in his eyes this time. The wariness was still there, but it wasn't as intense. It was as if Max was beginning to accept that James wasn't going anywhere. "Do you want to do something today?" James asked, trying to sound casual, even though his heart was beating faster than he would have liked. "Maybe we could go to the park. Or, I don't know, maybe shoot some hoops in the driveway." Max hesitated, looking from his toy car to James, as though weighing his options. James could tell the boy was still unsure about spending more time with him, but it was a small step forward that he was willing to take. After a long pause, Max finally nodded, though it was barely perceptible. "Okay," Max said, his voice quiet. "All right," James said, trying to keep his voice light. "Let's go." They headed outside, and for the next couple of hours, they played basketball in the driveway. It wasn't a perfect bonding moment, but it was real. Max was tentative at first, still not fully engaged, but slowly he began to loosen up. They took turns shooting hoops, and with each shot, there was less distance between them. James could see it in the way Max's shoulders relaxed, in the way he laughed when he made a basket. He wasn't completely comfortable yet, but he was starting to enjoy himself. After a while, they sat down on the curb, both of them out of breath. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the yard. James looked at Max, who was now leaning back on his hands, staring up at the sky. The boy didn't say anything at first, but then, in a quiet voice, he spoke. "Thanks," Max said, his eyes still on the sky. "For spending time with me. It's fun." James's heart swelled with emotion. The simple words, the soft way Max had spoken them, meant more than anything James could have imagined. He didn't know if Max was ready to fully accept him as his father, but this was progress. This was a sign that they were moving in the right direction. "You're welcome, Max," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad you're having fun. I'll always be here for you. You don't ever have to doubt that." Max didn't respond, but James could see that he was listening, that he was starting to understand. They didn't need to have all the answers right now. They didn't need to fix everything in one day. What mattered was that they were building something together, even if it was small moments, one day at a time. As James got up to leave, he turned back to Max, who was still sitting on the curb, his eyes following him. "I'll be back tomorrow, okay?" James said. Max nodded, this time a little more confidently than before. "Okay." James walked away with a sense of quiet pride. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They were starting to build something, and that was enough for now. For the first time, James felt like he could be the father Max needed, that he could be the man he had always wanted to be. It was a long road ahead, and he knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to keep showing up. For Max. For himself. For their future.